What is up, guys? It is SteadyChaos. So right now what you see is the C1 on your left, the C1 on your right, and we are playing Dying Light on PC. We have it locked to 60 FPS. And this is an SDR, and there's really no difference in my opinion between the two screens. The brightness looks pretty much the same. Maybe slightly sharper on the C1 on your left, but that's because it's a 48-inch model compared to the 55-inch model of the C10 on the right. It could also be slightly that the Alpha 9 Gen 4 processor in the C1 does a little bit better job with crispness. I think that is the case to some degree, but it's a relatively minor difference between the Alpha 9 Gen 3 on the C10. But if you look at this sunrise, pretty much the same level of brightness, I would say. I don't see a huge departure. Now, a lot of people have asked me, what about black frame insertion? When you're not using VRR, because you can't use VRR and BFI together, what does the TV look like, the C1 that is, when using black frame insertion? Does it help with motion resolution? Does it help with screen clarity? And the biggest question is, does it really dim the screen? Because we all know what happened with the LG C10. When you use BFI on high, especially with the LG C10, it killed specular highlight detail in HDR. It crushed shadow detail. It made the overall screen look dim and lose some of that dynamic depth that it had. So for this particular test, I figured we'd put them up side by side and engage BFI. So full disclosure, first and foremost, both TVs are using the exact same settings. Both are in game user mode. Both have 50 OLED light, 85 contrast, 50 brightness, that's all set the same. Both are using gamma 2.2. Both have color set to 50. The white balance is a little bit difficult to make exactly the same between the two because they use two different sliding scales. The C10 is warm 2 out of 3, the C1 is warm 35 out of 50, but overall I'd say they're pretty similar in terms of warmth. So back out of that, now we go into picture options on the C10, and we go into clarity. Both are using 0 sharpness. None of these features like super resolution noise reduction, MPEG noise reduction, that's all off between the two. But the big one is true motion or BFI. That's what we're here for, right? So both are off right now, and like I said, in SDR you pretty much have the same level of brightness, the same overall picture reproduction between the two. With the C10, we all know what happens when we start engaging BFI. Okay, it gets dark. So low, I already lost quite a bit of brightness on low. Medium loses just a touch more, not a huge departure from low. And then high, bam. Look at how dull that screen has gotten. There's a little bit of BFI flicker. It's not too bad. I feel like it's something you could adjust to over time, but you cannot adjust to this level of dimness. It just, look at the sunrise. It's lost all of its sort of dynamic depth. The sunlight coming through the leaves here on the trees, it just looks muted. It doesn't have that same level of pop that it had before. Some of these shadowy areas on the lower side of the trees have become crushed. So that is why most people just simply did not use OLED Motion Pro on the C10 or the G10 or the B10 for that matter, because it just dimmed the screen in SDR, and in HDR it pretty much, what's the point of using HDR if it kills your specular highlight detail? So most people, myself included, just simply did not recommend using black frame insertion on your LG C10. What about using it on the C1? Has LG done a better job of implementing it on the C1? Well, let's take a look. Low, a little bit of screen dimness, but not bad. Medium, really no change from low. Honestly, it looked like it might have gotten a little bit brighter. And then high, not bad at all. Wow, what a major difference between the two screens. Look at that, guys. That, I did not expect that. This is the first time I've tried using BFI on the LG C1. Everything I've been doing up to this point has been testing G-Sync, VRR flicker, all that stuff. I haven't tested or even bothered testing BFI until now, and look at the difference in brightness. Both have the same exact settings that I just told you about. Both are in game mode. Both are pretty much warm 2. And look at the difference in overall screen brightness. It is so much brighter on the C1 with BFI at high. It's not even close. Not even close. Look at that. This section on the C10, the sunrise, the God rays coming through the trees, it looks muted, it looks softer, it does not look as impactful or as bright as it should be. And then you come over here on the C1, look at how bright and intense that sunrise is coming through the clouds. The God rays coming through here are bright and impactful. Wow. I am surprised that it's this much of a difference between the two sets. The C1 retains more of its color and punch with BFI set to high than the C10 does, and I'm sure this is coming through in the camera. Even though I have the ISO set kind of low so that we don't get any sort of like blooming from the camera, I'm sure this is coming through. There is a major and perceptible difference in brightness using the C1 over the C10. Look at that difference. I mean, you can't tell me that it doesn't look better on the C1. It just simply looks better. And it's not just the fact that it's brighter right here on the C1, which it certainly is, and the God rays are more pronounced, but it looks like the overall screen contrast is better on the C1. It just has a little bit brighter color and sky here in the corner. The trees pop, the sunlight coming through the tops of the trees here. It just pops a little bit more on the C1. The God rays pop more. Everything looks more appealing on the C1. It's a major difference. Wow. Both are using game user picture setting. Both have the same warmth setting. Both have the same contrast. In this game, Dying Light on my PC in SDR, and it's not even close how much better the C1 looks. You add in that little touch of increased sharpness and clarity from the smaller screen size and maybe the Alpha 9 Gen 4 processor from the C1, and you just have a far superior picture when using BFI for SDR Gaming. So what about HDR Gaming? Let's pull up Resident Evil The Village and take a look at both of these sets running BFI on high and off with an HDR game and compare them. All right, let's do that. Okay, so now we have Resident Evil The Village loaded up in HDR mode. They're both, again, in game user mode as far as picture settings. And the brightness, 100, 150, 10, 50 on the C10. And then the same settings on the C1, 100, 150. Dynamic tone mapping is on, peak brightness is high. Black level is auto, color 50. Sharpness 10, everything else is off. We go down to advanced controls, dynamic tone mapping is on the C10 as well. White balance, like I said, we'll put it at warm 2 to try to make this as equal as possible. And color, white balance, warm, we'll go a little warmer, warm 30 to try and make it as equal as possible between these two sets. And we'll go down to picture options on the C10. We'll go back to true motion. We're in HDR right now. Obviously VRR is still off because I'm going to use BFI. So let's go back to clarity. True motion. Okay, true motion. Let's go high. High. Okay, now take a look at the screens. Now we have some dimming on both screens for sure. This is a very dark game, keep that in mind, but I would say the dimming, especially on the specular highlights, is more aggressive on the C10. Look at the gun here. If you look at the gun on the C10, it just, the screen in general looks more muted. The specular highlight right here in the gun looks a little bit more muted. It doesn't stand out as much. If you look at the C1, you see the gun detail right here, this light reflecting off the gun. That specular highlight detail is more pronounced. It jumps off your screen more. Absolutely. So this, I would just say BFI in general just runs better on the C1. It does not dim the screen as aggressively. And if you look in this area on your C10, it just looks crushed. The shadow detail looks crushed with BFI engaged. It's not as crushed on the C1. Go up these stairs here. Now, take a look. This is a great way to illustrate the difference between these two sets when BFI is engaged to high. Now, one good thing I will say is I'm not really noticing any BFI flicker or strobing right now, so that's good. Maybe my eyes have adjusted to it. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if the camera's going to pick up on it. We'll have to find out. But this area right here, again, we're in HDR, so it's all about specular highlight. It's all about that high dynamic range. It's all about getting that maximum brightness and darkness so you have that stark contrast so your screen really pops. With BFI on high, as we've been saying, it looks muted on the C10. When you look here on the C1, look at this area. How much brighter it is, how much more impressive the contrast is on the C1. It looks much better. So what we'll do now is let's get back into the BFI settings for these respective TVs and let's turn them off to see what we're looking at, okay? Advanced controls, let's see, clarity, picture options, true motion. Let's go to off. Oh yeah, that screen brightens up even more. And then we'll go to off on the C10. Now let's take a look at how these TVs are performing in HDR without any BFI engaged. I still feel like the C1 looks a little bit better. It really does. This area right here on the C1, now with no BFI engaged, just looks more pronounced and more impressive. And dare I say the colors look a little bit more accurate on the C1 maybe? Whereas the C10, this area does not look quite as bright. It doesn't seem to have quite as much just bright pop as the C1 does right here. Maybe the color temperature setting within the two TVs is not exactly the same. I tried to make it the same, having the C1 at warm 30 and the C10 at warm 2, but the fact of the matter is, like I said, they're not the same sliding scale. They don't use the exact same metrics. So getting them to be exactly the same is tough. So I think the C10 looks maybe a little bit more yellowish here, as its warm 2 might be slightly more aggressive than warm 30 on the C1. But either way, I still feel like the pop is better on the C1 on your left here. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. So I think ultimately what we can take away from this video, whether you're using these TVs, the C1 or the C10 in SDR mode or HDR mode, the way that they feel for the most part is the same, I would say, with BFI engaged. They both feel a little bit laggy with BFI engaged. They both do a pretty good job of improving motion resolution with BFI engaged. And they both do a pretty good job at mitigating flicker. I don't think it's too bad. However, there's a huge difference with the two TVs in HDR and SDR mode when using BFI on high. On the C1, you don't subject yourself to as much screen dimming with BFI on high. On the C10 with BFI set to high, forget it. You absolutely crush your shadow detail. You dim the screen overall. The screen, especially in HDR, it loses that pop. Those specular highlights don't stand out as much as they do on the C1. So an interesting result. I would definitely say that LG's implementation of BFI is, I don't want to say far superior, but it is certainly noticeably superior on the C1. Okay guys, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and please subscribe to the channel, and we will see you guys later. Peace.